guys, welcome to the fourth episode of our Reactive Angular course. In the previous episode, we started extending our demo application, we started adding features to it, learning RxJS operators on the way. But so far, we only had to deal with a single observable that was the only source of data in our application. In this episode, we are going to introduce more observables and we will learn of some techniques of how to combine these observables. And in the process, we will extend the application and add some nice functionalities. So we will allow the data to be refreshed periodically, and we will also add routing into the picture. Okay, so let's get to work. So we are again looking at our bonds database, and so far the application displays a list of bonds and allows them to refresh, showing a loading indicator. So what we are going to do now is we're going to look at this isActive column. So we're going to add some filtering based on this column. We'll allow the user to only show active bonds or only show inactive bonds or to show all bonds. And we will implement this feature using Angular routing. Okay, let's go back to the source code and let's start by importing the router module. So we go to app module and import router module. We need to add an import for that. So import router module from Angular/router. Alright, now let's initialize some routes. So we will define the routes array, and it will contain one entry because we only have a single component at the moment. So the path will be simply bonds, and the component is of course our only component, which is bond list component. And let's also add a default path with redirect to bonds and path match full. And now we need to pass this routes array to the for route call for the router module. Alright, now we need to add some links to allow the users to switch between different filters. Let's go to our app component HTML file, and now instead of explicitly embedding bond list component, we will use router outlet, and of course Angular router will inject the desired component here. So at the top we will add a list in which we will put three options. So active, inactive and all. So these are our filtering options. So we need to add router link directive for them, and for all of them it will simply point to bonds, and what will be different for them is the query parameters. So we will drive the routing, the filtering with query params. So for active we define active to be true. Let's copy that. And for inactive we define active to be false, and for all we don't define any query parameter, which means that if the active flag is undefined, we want to show all bonds. Okay, so now comes the interesting part. Let's go to the bond list component and let's inject the activated root object, which will give us some information about the currently selected root. It's activated root of type activated root. So now this gets interesting, because if we look at activated root dot query params, we will see that the type of that is an observable of a dictionary. And the reason for that is because Angular reuses the component instance to handle different roots. So as long as the component stays visible, it is not destroyed, but just the query params change. When we click on active, the active flag will be set to true. If we click on inactive, the active flag will be set to false. But we are still working with the same instance of the component. So what will actually happen is that this query params observable will emit new values whenever query parameters change. So now we need to think of how we would like to react to these changes of query parameters. We need to apply some filtering based on the contents of these query parameters. And if we look at the getBunch implementation, it takes an optional active flag. So what we need to do is simply pass this active flag from query parameters to this method call. Okay, but that means that we want to invoke this method. We want to fetch the data from the server whenever there is a change in query parameters, whenever this stream emits a new value. However, we already have a stream that causes refresh of data in this component, and it's called refresh trigger stream. As you might remember, refresh trigger stream is based on refresh data click stream. So whenever the user clicks on a button, the data is refreshed. So now we have like two sources of events that should cause a refresh in this component. The first is the stream of button clicks, and the second is the stream of query parameters. So whenever any of these emits something, we need to go to the server and fetch the list of bunts again. So we have to somehow take both of these streams and make the getBunch call happen whenever any of these emits. In other words, we need to include this stream to be part of refresh trigger stream. And we already know an operator that takes two observables and returns a new observable which emits whenever any of these streams emits, and it's called merge. However, we need something slightly different here, because we are interested in the value emitted by one of these observables. And what's important, we are always interested in this value. So even if it's refresh data click that emits a new value, we still need to know the latest value emitted by this stream. So that's why we will use an operator called CombineLatest. Okay, so let's add this new operator to the pipeline. So we add the new CombineLatest operator, and it takes an observable which we would like to combine with the source observable. And in our case, it will be this activated root.query params. So now if we take a look at the type of this new observable, it's an observable of a pair. And the first element of a pair is an empty object, because the refresh data click stream emits empty objects, because there is no data associated with the button click. But the second element of the pair is more interesting. It's the dictionary of query parameters. So it's a pair because we are interested in both values. emitted by both observables, but we need to get this pair whenever any of these observable emits a value. And that's exactly what CombineLatest do. Now we need to take this pair and extract the active flag from it, because that's what we are eventually interested in. We can use the well-known map operator. The map obviously takes a function, so we can do a nice trick here, a TypeScript trick, so we can destructure the argument passed to this function. We know that it's a pair, so we will use square brackets, and we will ignore the first element because it's always an empty object and we are not interested in it. But we are of course interested in the second element of the pair, which we'll call params. So now inside the function body we need to extract the active flag from it. We could try something like this, but now if we take a look at the type of this, it's not actually inferred, but the problem is that params.active is a string. Query parameters are always string values, so we need to parse it to be a boolean. It's not very clean, but we can do something like this. First we check whether params.active is undefined, in which case we return undefined. Otherwise we compare params.active with a string representing true value. So now the type of our refresh trigger stream is a boolean representing the active flag, the active parameter. What it means is that if we look at this observable, the bundle stream, it starts from refresh trigger stream, which now emits booleans, which means that this merge map call, it no longer takes an empty parameter list, it takes the active flag. And now we can simply pass this active flag to our getBunds call. And that gives us exactly what we wanted. So we extract this active flag from query parameters, we parse it to a boolean, and then we pass it to the getBunds call, so it's taken into account and the filter is applied. Okay, let's go to the application and see if it works. So you can see the 3 new filters here. So let's click on active. And we can see that only active bunds are present. So the query parameter has been added to the root, and activated root.queryParams emitted a new value which caused by merge map a trip to the server side, which returned us the bundle list. But on the way the active flag was passed, which only caused the active bunds to be returned. We can also check inactive and all. Okay, so that was the first part. Now we will look at implementing another scenario. So let's say that our simple application allows some users to log in, and for any user we store his favorite band. So we would like to see a column here which says that given band is the favorite band of the currently logged user. Let's start by generating a service, call it user data service, and we will of course mock the user data service, so it will always return the same user with the same favorite band. I will just paste the code of this because it is not really interesting for our explanation of RxJS. So what we have here is a service which has the current user property, which returns an observable of user. We will define it in a moment. And we simply return a fixed user with some delay. Okay, so let's now go to the data model, and I will again paste the user interface, which has a name and favorite band ID. So in this case, the favorite band ID refers to one of the bands on our inside band data service. Lastly, we need to provide this new service. So let's add it, the providers array here. Okay, so back to the band list component. So what we need to do now is, when building this band list stream, we of course fetch the list of bands, but we need to combine this array of bands with the information about currently logged user, which is also an observable. So it's another stream. So once we have both of this information, we can go through the list of bands and check whether one of them is the favorite of the currently logged user. Okay, so how to change this stream so we also fetch the information about currently logged user? There are different ways to do this, but I would like to focus on one of them. So what we are going to do is we are going to trigger these requests in parallel. So we'll concurrently fetch the list of bands and fetch the currently logged user. And for that we will use another new operator. It's called ForkJoin. ForkJoin takes two or more observable streams and waits for all of them to emit, and only then emits a single value which consists all of the results emitted by all these observables. Let's see it in action. So we will add ForkJoin here. We need to import it. So let's go here and import ForkJoin from RxJS /observable/ForkJoin. It's not an operator actually, it's a way of creating an observable. So we don't import it from RxJS operators, we import it from this specific namespace. Okay, so now as I said, ForkJoin takes one or more observables. It doesn't make sense for a single observable. It only makes sense if we invoke it with two or more. So now we said that we need to invoke two requests concurrently. So the first one is to fetch the list of bands, and the second one is this.user data service .current user. We don't have user data service yet, so let's inject it to the constructor like this. Okay, let's take a look. What's the type of the band list stream now? It's an observable of a pair. Again, it's a pair because we are combining two observables, just as we did with CombineLatest. Just this time it just works slightly differently, but we end up with a pair. The first element is a list of bands, and the second element is currently logged user. So you see, now we have everything we need. We have the list of bands and we have the currently logged in user, so we can go through the list of bands and see which band is the user's favorite. Okay, so let's use map again, and let's again use the same trick with destructuring. But now we need both of the emitted values. So the first one is bands and the second one is current user. Now, how to find the favorite band? We will use map, but this will not be the same map as here. This will be the plain old map on arrays, because bands is an array. So let's do bands.map, and map takes a function that is invoked for every element, so we'll investigate every element and we will compare the band's ID with current user's favorite band ID. So we take each element, and now depending on the result of this comparison of band.id with current user.favorite band ID, if it is actually the favorite band, we extend the band object with favorite flag set to true. And otherwise, we simply return exactly the same band object. Let's fix nesting here. Alright, it seems that we are done. Now let's look again at how we construct the band list. We start with refresh trigger stream, and now the refresh trigger stream is actually, there are many different ways to trigger a refresh. One of them is the change in activated route, another is clicking the button, and there is also the initial refresh trigger. So we start from this refresh trigger stream, and we merge map every value emitted from it, and this value represents the filter, and for every value emitted from it we return a new observable created by running concurrently these two server requests. The first one is to fetch the list of bands, and the other one is to fetch the current user. So after this is done and we are inside this map, we already have both of the information needed, so the list of bands and the current user. So all we have to do is to go through the bands array and check whether band ID of given band is equal to current user.favorite band ID. Okay, there's one small thing we need to do. Let's go to the template and add a new column here. Is favorite, and let's use interpolation to display the value. And what did I call it? It's just favorite. Alright, now we can run the application, and that's it. We can see the isFavorite flag set to true for Slayer, for one of the bands. We can check that it still works if we refresh the data, or if we apply some filters, so all or active, because Slayer is an active band. And that's it.
So, in this episode, we've learned about some techniques to combine different observables. In the next episode, we are going to look at the problem of observables that produce too many events and how to deal with this problem. And by the way, if you enjoyed the course and you think that it's bringing you a lot of value, then as a way of thanking us, let's subscribe to this channel.